I've got some. I don't have much time, so I will put some questions on notice. So I'm keen to focus on your CSG study, the one which phase 1 has been completed and phase 2 is underway. That's called Field Measurements of Fugitive Emissions from Equipment and Well Casings in Australian Coal Seam Gas Production Facilities. So we've talked about that one before. Can you just remind me of the scope of which stages of production are being assessed, both in phase 1 and then in phase 2, and in particular whether there is any differences, because I think I understand that stage 2 is looking at even fewer stages of production than phase 1 did.
Yep. So it's Dr. Damien Barrett. I'm Research Director in the Energy Business Unit in CSIRO. The study that you're referring to is the study that's funded by the Federal Department of Environment. Mm-hmm. There are 2 phases associated with that work. The first phase is complete. Mm-hmm. That first phase looked at emissions of methane to the atmosphere associated with drilling and, associated with the production of gas. So those are wells that are completed and they are producing gas for supply. The second phase, which is currently underway, that's due at this stage to report in December 2015. That study is looking at well completions and what are called workovers. So workovers, wells that have been sunk, that are in production, and then some form of drilling or other work is required to repair, say, a pump or increase production, some factor like that associated with the well.
All right, thank you for that. So can you just confirm for me that that means that phase 2 won't be considering leaks from equipment and well casings?
Well, the phase 1 study, as part of its measurements, did take into account that methane coming from wellheads. If there had been leaks from casings, then that would have been incorporated into those measurements. That study showed that essentially all of the leaks that they did find were associated with flanges, and once they were identified could be relatively easily fixed. There was reported also a flux associated with water equipment, and that results in venting of methane to the atmosphere from the associated water.
So is that the water equipment that you noticed in phase 1 but wasn't within scope of phase 1? I think, if I recall the parameters correctly.
Yep.
But that's not now within scope in phase 2 either?
Yeah, that was essentially fortuitous in that venting at the time the measurements were made.
Okay,
Yep.
So you've noticed something that might be
that.
a new fresh source of fugitives in phase 1, but it wasn't within scope to look at it further. Why is it not then being looked at in phase 2?
The measurements that are being made are very labour intensive, very time intensive, and are logistically difficult to make because the scientists have to be there in the field operating field equipment at the same time that the drilling team are completing a well. The logistics of that are difficult. The measurements need to be made over a period of, say, 2 or 3 days. And the measurement events are periodic, so they need to capture those events. So it's quite intensive work. That was the intent of phase 2, to focus purely on those well completions. There was intent to focus on hydraulic fracturing events, and we are hoping to be able to do that over the next coming months as the project proceeds.
Okay, I want to come to fracking a little bit later, but just in relation to the logistics being difficult in the course of sinking the well to capture the water infrastructure emissions, am I correct that the funding for phase 2 is quite small. It's at 190,000.
That's correct.
When you're referring to the logistics being difficult, if there was additional funding, could you have placed scientists in the field for the relevant time to accurately study that phase?
The emissions associated with water infrastructure are distributed across a greater area and would ideally require a particular focus on that. And my understanding is that there has been some discussion with the department about potential for that.
To be looked at in future?
Possibly, yes. Okay. The other aspect of this is work that's being undertaken under the Gas Industry Social and Environmental Research Alliance, which is looking at methane seeps to the atmosphere. As part of that study and reported in phase 2 of that study were measurements made by mobile survey of methane emissions from water infrastructure. For example, holding ponds. That flux was reported in there.
Thank you. I will take up with Gazera somehow about the scope of that particular study a bit further. But just coming back to your study in phase 1 and phase 2, and just for my own clarity, my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that phase 1 considered of the 43 wells that you looked at in phase 1, 3 of those included leaks from equipment and well casings. But I'm interested in what phase those leaks from equipment and well casings occurred at. Was it during operations, or was it after the sealing and capping of the well?
So in phase 1, they were
just production.
They were production wells.
Okay, so
they were
it's
producing
leaks that
gas
happen while it's being used.
while it's in production.
So has phase 1 or 2 looked at the post capping and sealing leaks?
So you mean after well shut-in and abandonment?
Correct.
No, because we don't have wells in that vicinity that are shut in at the moment.
Okay, there are wells that have been just not in your study area. When you say in that vicinity, why not look at them in a different vicinity?
My understanding in the Surat Basin is that there are at present shut-in wells under some of the companies, and those shut-ins are done as based on business factors for those companies. We haven't taken any measurements associated with those wells. My understanding is that those wells would then come back online at some point in the future.
So they've just
they're not abandoned wells.
temporarily shut them down, but they'll reopen them. So there's no well that's been finished to look at whether the casings and the ceilings are holding.
I'm not aware of wells that have been abandoned in the Surat Basin. There are coal exploration bores that were sunk in the 1960s, 70s and 80s. The work that we've done in relation to Jazeera has identified the location of a number of those, and we've reported those to the Queensland Government, who have plugged those wells.
Okay. Look, I might put some more questions on notice on that and move on to my other angles.